Okay, so it's good to see everybody, and I don't remember if we had class last Friday. Something happened with my father. He had fallen, and I don't know. I really barely remember what I did yesterday. So I know where we left off, but I don't know if this was where we left off last week or 2 weeks ago. So I have us on page 39.
Yeah,
And
we met last week,
we
as I
did.
recall.
Okay.
Yeah. You told us about the book of Joshua and how you learned it in
Oh,
school.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. I just, yeah.
I think we were supposed to not have it, and then at the last minute you said, "Oh, we'll go have
Okay.
it."
Got it. Okay. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're on chapter 8, starting with verse 3. I think that did we read the whole chapter in Hebrew and in English? No, we did not. Okay. So this verses 1 and 2, just to remind us, they're going up to battle Ai, and and that's right. The previous chapter was about the guy Achan who had taken booty, and now and Ai is about to be given to the people. You shall do, verse 2, you shall do to Ai and her king as you did unto Jericho and her king. Only the spoil thereof and the cattle thereof shall you take for a prey unto yourselves. Set thee an ambush for the city behind it. Okay, so the difference between the battle now for Ai and the battle with Jericho is they're now allowed to take loot and the cattle from the city, whereas with Jericho, everything was off limits. Okay, verse 3. Let's see. Let's do 3 to 17. Vayakom Yehoshua v'chol am hamilchama la'alot ha'ai. Vayivchar Yehoshua 30,000 ish giborei chayil vayishlachem laila. Vayetzav otam lemor. Re'u atem orvim la'ir me'acharei ha'ir. Al tarchiku min ha'ir ma'od. V'yitem kulchem nechonim. Va'ani v'chol ha'am asher iti nikra vel ha'ir. V'haya ki yetzu likratenu ka'asher barishona v'nasnu lifnehem. V'yatzu acharenu ad hatikenu otam min ha'ir. Ki yomru nasim lefanenu ka'asher barishona v'nasnu lifnehem. Ve'atem takumu me ha'orev v'horashtem et ha'ir unetana Adonai Elohechem b'yedchem. Ve'haya ketachsechem et ha'ir tatzitu et ha'ir ba'esh ki dvar Adonai ta'asu re'u tziviti etchem. Vayishlachem Yehoshua vayelchu el ha'ma'arav vayeshevu bein Beit El uvein ha'ai miyam la'ai vayalen Yehoshua balayla hahu betoch ha'am. Vayashkem Yehoshua baboker vayifkod et ha'am vaya'al hu v'zignei Yisrael lifnei ha'am ha'ai. V'chol ha'am hamilchama asher ito alu vayikshu vayavo'u neged ha'ir vayachanu mitzvon la'ai v'hagai beinav uvein ha'ai. Vayikach kechameshet alafim ish vayasem otam orev bein Beit El uvein ha'ai miyam la'ir. Vayasimu ha'am et kol hamachaneh asher mitzvon la'ir ve'et akevo miyam la'ir vayelech Yehoshua balayla huhu betoch ha'emek. Vayihi kirot melech ha'ai vayemaharu vayashkimu vayetzu anshei ha'ir likrat Yisrael lemilchama hu v'chol amo lamoed lifnei ha'arava, v'hu lo yada ki orev lo me'acharei ha'ir. Vayinag'u Yehoshua v'chol Yisrael lifneihem vayanusu derech hamidbar. Vayiz'aku kol ha'am asher ba'ir. I think it's supposed to be ba'ai. Kol ha'am asher ba'ai lirdof achareihem vayirdefu acharei Yehoshua vayinatku min ha'ir. V'lo nishar ish ba'ai uve'et el asher lo yatzu acharei Yisrael vayazvu at ha'ir petucha vayirdefu acharei Yisrael. All right, so there's a lot of strategy, military strategy going on here. Verse 3, Joshua arose and all of the soldiers, or it says people of war, but all the soldiers, to go up to Ai. And Joshua chose 30,000 men, soldiers, well, it says men of valor, but soldiers, and sent them forth at night. And he commanded them, saying, see, you are lying in ambush. So I think the Aleph, Resh, Bet root, the three-letter root there is ambush. So you are ambushing the city from behind the city. Don't get far from the city. Don't get very far from the city, and be prepared. All right, so he's telling these soldiers to be in ambush. Why? Verse 5, and I and all the people that are with me will get close to the city, and when they come out to meet us, right, latzeit likro, kietzu likratenu, they come out to meet us. This here in this context means in a formal way about to engage in war. Okay, because you could use the same phrase about going into a meeting with somebody that they've come out to meet us. Okay, but here it's meeting us in this formal way about engaging in battle. So when they come out to engage us, as they did at first, remember the previous chapter, we'll chase after them. Or no, we won't chase after them. We'll run away from them. We'll run away from them. We'll flee from before them. They'll come out after us until we've drawn them away from the city, because they will say they're running away from us like they did before. So let's chase after them. And they're running away from us. And you, the people who are lying in ambush, get up from the ambush and take possession of the city, and God, your God, will give it into your hands. Right? So this is the strategy. There's some soldiers are lying in ambush. The others are going to wait at the city gate. Once the people of Ai see that the Israelites are there again, they'll come out for war again. We'll run away, draw them out in that way. And you, when it's all clear, because they're chasing after us, you can go in and take the city. Verse 8, when you take the city, you should set the city on fire, as God has said you should do. See, I have commanded you. And Joshua sent them, and they went into the ambush, and they sat between Beit El and Ai, from the western side of Ai, and Joshua stayed the night among the people. Verse 10, Joshua got up in the morning, and he numbered the people, and he got up, he arose, or went up, and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the people of war with him got up and approached and came opposite the city, and they camped they camped on the on the northern side of Ai, with the valley between them and Ai. I don't know which valley this is. And he took 5,000 men and he put them in ambush between, or set them up to ambush between Beit El and Beit Ai on the western side of the city. And he so all the people and all the camp that is on the northern part of the city, and the back side of it, of the people on the western side of the city. And Joshua went that night in the valley. And when the king of Ai saw, they hastened, and they got up, and they went out. The people of the city went out to meet Israel for war. He and all his people, at the appointed time, in front of the Arava, and he did not know that there was an ambush behind him against the city. And Joshua and all the people made as if they were beaten before them, and they ran away towards the desert. And all the people screamed out. All the people that were in Ai were called together. Vayiz Aku. So they're translating that as called together. Usually it's cry out. All the people in Ai were called together to chase after them, and they chased after Joshua, and they were drawn away from the city. There wasn't a person at all. There wasn't a man left in Ai and in Beit El that didn't go out after Israel, and they left the city open, and they chased after Israel. Okay, so let's look. There's not much commentary on this. Let's look at the commentary that begins with verse 3 on the bottom of page 40. 30,000 men. It's clear from the narrative that the 30,000 represented the total attacking force which Joshua disposed as narrated, using some for the frontal attack and others, 5,000 in verse 12, for the ambush. But see on verse 12. All right, so it seems so far 25,000 would be for the running away, and the 5,000 would be for the ambush. Verse 5, as at first, as described in chapter 7, verse 5, when the Israelites fled in earnest. On the present occasion, the flight was to be arranged for strategical purposes. Joshua lodged that night among the people. His presence would hearten them for the attack, since they still smarted under the previous defeat. Numbered the people. Just one second here. I just had my son was calling me, and I just had to send a text to say I can't talk. Okay. Numbered the people. The morning of the attack seems rather late for numbering the forces. Another version has mustered the people is preferable. Right. So it's just sorry. Okay, all the people, verse 11. The Hebrew construction is unusual. V'chol ha'am hamilchama. Right. There's an extra hey there. So it should be v'chol am hamilchama, not ha'am hamilchama. So, and all the people, the war, as opposed to all the people of war. Okay, so that's what this comment is saying. The Hebrew construction is unusual, namely the absolute form of the noun where the construct is required. The text is literally all the people, the war. Right. So he took about 5,000 men. This is not a repetition, but an amplification of the data contained in verses 3-9. Rashi and Kimchi, two medieval commentators, suggest that Joshua set a double ambush, one nearer to the city than the other, one consisting of 30,000 men and the other of 5,000. All right, so maybe the Hebrew is not so clear, but it seems from context that there's the entire group is 30,000, and he took 5,000 of them to be in ambush. So the people set themselves in array, more literally, so they set the people, etc. They referring to Joshua and the elders mentioned in verse 10. All right, so just kind of clarifying how this all went down. Their rear, that is his heel. And Joshua went, the tense is probably to be understood as a pluperfect. Joshua having marched that night through the valley. Some manuscripts read lodged for went, which is also the reading in the Talmud and the Septuagint. So that is, oh, that's interesting. So there's an asterisk on page 41, the last line of verse 13, you see the word is vayelech. So vayelech has an asterisk pointing out that some versions have, instead of the final chaf, a final nun. So there is not much of a difference. Let me get a piece of paper here and show you. If I write a final chaf and a final nun, final chaf, so the wider one is a final chaf, the narrower one is a final nun. You can see how a scribe could make an error and not make the line long enough, so that it could be either vayalen or vayelech. Okay, so either he went in the valley or he lodged in the valley. Okay. Verse 14, at the time appointed, determined by the king and his generals as to when they were going to go out to war. The Arava, the plain, the valley broadening out into a plain, at the beginning of which, namely the end nearest Ai, the battle took place. By the way of the wilderness, that is eastward, drawing the army of Ai farther from the Israelite ambuscade to the west of the city. Never heard of that word, but I guess it's like ambush, but ambuscade. Is that a Scrabble word? It's a little bit too long to be a Scrabble word, right? More than 8 letters, not 7. Okay, all the people, perhaps inclusive of the civilians. Bethel, near to and west of Ai, the two cities must have united their forces to repel the invader. They left the city open. The earlier victory had lulled them into a sense of careless confidence. Okay, so this is the strategy so far. And yeah, so the chapter, let's see. Let's read to the end of the chapter now. But I'll do it verse by verse. Vayomer Adonai El Yehoshua nete bakidon asher biyadcha el ha'ai ki viyadcha et nena Vayet Yehoshua bakidon asher beyado el ha'ir. God said to Joshua, stretch out the javelin. Let me just see, before we'll read altar in a little bit, but I just want to see how he translates the word kidon in verse 18. What does he say? Javelin. He says it's a javelin also. It just, I'd never seen the word before. So stretch out the javelin that is in your hand to eye. I assume we all know what a javelin is, right? It's a there's an event of that in the Summer Olympics. It's part of the decathlon, the 10 events meet that track athletes do, but it's also an individual event. So it's like a long spear. It's pointed at either end, and there's a certain amount of space that you're allowed to run, and then you get to a line or a line in the dirt or like a piece of wood, and you put your foot on that. You can't go beyond it. And you use that to throw the javelin. And the point of the javelin throw is to see how long you can throw it until it lands on the ground. Okay, I have no idea what the record is for track athletes to throw a javelin, but apparently it's probably one of the oldest sports that's in the Summer Olympics, probably going back to when the Olympics were held in Greek times. So that javelin is this is the first time we're encountering this word in the Bible, and I have no idea how long the javelin was compared to how long the javelin is in the Olympics. I don't know what it was made of. Was it metal? Was it wood? Was it stone? I have no idea. But Joshua had this javelin. So stretch out the javelin in your hand to eye, because I have given it into your hand. And Joshua stretched the javelin to the city. Okay, kind of like Moses stretching out his staff over the sea. So Joshua stretching out the javelin in the direction of Ai. Veha orev kam mehera mimakomo vayarutsu kinatot yado vayavohu ha'ir vayilkeduha vayemaharu vayatzitu et ha'ir ba'esh. So the ambush got up quickly from its place, and they ran as Joshua raised his hand, and they came to the city and took it. And they quickly set the city on fire. Vayifnu anshe ha'ai acharehem, vayiru vehine ala ashan ha'ir hashamayama, velo hayavahem yadayim lanus hena, vehena veha'am hanas hamidbar nehepach el harodeh. So the people of Ai turned around, and they saw that smoke was rising from the city to the sky. And they didn't have hands, or they didn't have power to flee this way or that. And the people who fled to the desert became the pursuer, right? In other words, the people of Ai who had come out to run after the Israelites now turned around, and they became the fleers, and the Israelites became the pursuers. The Yoshua v'chol Yisrael ra'u ki lachad ha'orev et ha'ir v'chi ala ashan ha'ir v'yashuvu v'yaku et anshe ha'ai. Joshua and all of Israel saw that the ambush had captured the city, and that the smoke of the city was rising. So they returned and struck the people of Ai. Ve'ela yatsu min ha'ir likratam vayu liYisrael batavech Ela mizeh ve'ela mizeh vayaku otam ad bilti hishir lahem sarid ufalit. And these left the city to meet them, and so they were in the midst of Israel, some here on this side, some on that side, and they smote them until there was not one left over. That Melech Ai tafsu Chai, vayakrivu oto el Yehoshua, and the king of Ai they captured alive, and they brought him close to Joshua. Vayehi kechalot Yisrael laharog et kol yoshvei ha'ai basadeh bamidbar asher redafum bo vayiplu kulam lefi charev ad tumam vayashuvu kol Yisrael ha'ai vayaku ota lefi charev. And when Israel finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the field in the desert, where they had pursued them to, all of them fell by the sword until they were all consumed or all killed. And Israel returned to Ai, and they struck them with the sword.
Rabbi,
Yes, Jules.
you keep translating the word wilderness as desert,
Yeah, well, that's how I understand it, but it is a wilderness.
but if you went to look for it today, would it be part of the desert?
Well,
if
so
anybody knows
that
where it is.
in modern Hebrew, Midbar is a desert. So, like the Negev is called in Israel, is called Midbar HaNegev, the Negev desert. So, I'm not sure exactly if the word Midbar can be used for any other uninhabited and a place without much life. Okay, so there could be places that are not a desert that could be a wilderness, and I guess the word midbar would be applied to that. In Israel today, midbar is really applied to just the Judean desert, like on the way to the Dead Sea, and also the Negev, and also the Sinai. Okay, so those are places where midbar is used. So I just, because I was trained with modern Hebrew, my go-to is to translate the word as wilderness. Okay. All right, verse 25. Vayehi kol hanoflim bayomahu me'ish ve'adisha shnei masar aleph kol anshe ha'ai. So all the people who were struck down or fell, that is, all those who were killed on that day, from man and women, are 12,000. All the people of Ai. V'Yoshua lo heshiv yado asher nata bakidon ad asher hecherim et kol yoshvei ha'ai. And Joshua did not take back his hand, right? He left it outstretched with the javelin. He did not pull his hand back that he had stretched out with the javelin until all of the people of Ai were annihilated. It says here, utterly destroyed. Rak habehema, verse 27, Rak habehema ushlal ha'ir hahi bazazu lahem Yisrael kidbar Adonai asher tzivat Yehoshua. Only the animals and the loot of that city did Israel take, as God said when he commanded Joshua. So that's the only thing that was not utterly destroyed, were the cattle and the loot. Vayisrof Yehoshua et ha'ai, vayesimeha tel olam shmama ad hayom hazeh. Joshua burned Ai and made it a tel forever. So a tel, like this mound where a city once was. So and uninhabited mound, wasted as a heap or desolation until this day. So I don't know about that, and I don't know if archaeologists have found Ai and have had done any archaeological discoveries there. You can Google it. It'd be interesting if they find a layer of ash, right, or where stones have kind of burn scars on them. That would be interesting to date that burn scar to try to see if this event is actually has anything historical about it. Yeah, Barry.
So I find this whole section interesting because this is God who basically told that Joshua how to do the plan, to do the ambush,
Right.
the javelin. And I'm just
It
wondering
seems that way. I'm not sure actually from context. God just says to Joshua, I'm giving Ai to you.
But he says to do it in an ambush. And
I'm not
then
sure, did God say that, or did Joshua come up with that plan?
I thought it said God said to ambush the people, and
so I'm not sure. I think Joshua came up with the plan. I think so in verse 1, God said to Joshua, fear not, don't be dismayed, take all the people of war with you, arise, go up to Ai. I've given the city into your hand, the king of Ai and his people and his city and his land. And you shall do to Ai and her king as you did to Jericho and her king, only the spoil thereof and the cattle thereof shall you take for prey unto yourselves, and set thee an ambush up. Set thee an ambush for the city behind it. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So God did say ambush. Okay.
And he also directed the javelin, as a sign.
But
that's
yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay. So my question though is, and I don't know if I always try to put these stories in a kind of historical context with other civilizations and cultures.
Yeah.
This is not, I mean, the later books of the Jewish Bible, are they concurrent with, like, I know that the Hammurabi Code preceded Leviticus. Right, but preceded the Torah. But like here's a very detailed accounting of how to attack a city and how the casualties are. Is that typical of other writings from other cultures? Indian culture.
I don't know. It's possible that we have writings that have survived other contemporary societies at the time, like the Assyrians or the Babylonians. Do they have any military records that survive that describe how they laid siege to a city and how they did these things? I don't know. Okay. I really don't know. It'd be interesting to see that. I would imagine, this is not my assumption is this is not unique to or new radical kind of military strategy that had never been done before. I really don't think so. I think the unique part of it was how quick the battle was, right? So usually battles took a while, and here this was pretty quick, and maybe the quickness of it was the role of God, could be attributed to the role of God in this. So again, this is meant to be understood from a religious perspective, so that the battle of Jericho and the battle of Ai are done at the will of God, and that enabled it to be done so quickly.
Well, following on what Barry had to say, there doesn't necessarily need to be independent historical other kinds of references done by outside the Bible to the destruction of the two cities. They're meant to tell a story with religious, philosophical meaning to them. They're not necessarily meant to be a record of history.
Right. And to piggyback onto that, the idea of this is how we should have dealt with the entire Canaanite population. The Bible might be saying here that later on we're going to find that we have a live and let live kind of policy, and Israelites living amidst the Canaanites. And this is like getting back to the fundamentals of the Torah, which was presented in Deuteronomy. You got to totally annihilate the population. So we have Jericho annihilated. Now we have Ai annihilated. And perhaps the lesson, if only the rest of the Canaanite towns could have been totally annihilated the same way.
Right.
Okay, so verse 29. Ve'et melech ha'ai tala al ha'etz ad et ha'arev uchavo hashemesh tziva Yehoshua vayoridu et nivlato min ha'etz vayashlichu ota el petach sha'ar ha'ir vayakimu alav gal avanim gadol ad hayom hazeh. And the king of Ai they hung from a tree until evening, and when the sun set, Joshua commanded, and they took down the corpse from the tree, and they threw it to the gate, to the opening of the gate of the city, and they erected on it a great mound of stones until this day. So to the entrance of the city, there's a mound of stones, and presumably under that would be the skeleton of the king of Ai. 45, verse 30, Az yivneh Yehoshua mizbeach ladonai Elohei Yisrael bahar Eval. Then Joshua built an altar to God, the God of Israel, on Mount Eval. Ka'asher tziva Moshe eved Adonai et bnei Yisrael, kakatuv besefer Torat Moshe, mizbach avanim shlemot asher lo henif alehem barzel, v'ya'alu alav olot ladonai v'yizbechu shlamim. As Moses, the servant of God, commanded the people of Israel, as is written in the book of the Torah of Moses, and an altar of whole stones, which metal instruments had not been set upon. They offered on it offerings to God, and they slaughtered or sacrificed peace offerings. Vayichtav sham al ha'avanim et mishneh Torat Moshe asher katav lifnei bnei Yisrael. And they wrote there on the stones the copy of the Torah of Moses that was written before the people of Israel. Right? Back in Deuteronomy, we're told you're going to have this ceremony on Mount Eval and Mount Gerizim. You're going to write the Torah on these stones. And so here is Joshua fulfilling that commandment that was back in the book of Deuteronomy. The whole Yisrael uzakenav v'shotrim v'shoftav omdim mizeh umizeh la'aron neged ha'kohanim haleviim nosei aron brit Adonai kager ka'ezrach chetzio el mul har Gerizim v'chetzio el mul har Eval Ka'asher tziva Moshe eved Adonai levarech et ha'am Yisrael barishonah. And all of Israel and its elders and its magistrates and its judges were standing here and here on either side of the ark against the Kohanim and Leviim, those carrying the ark of the covenant of God. Resident aliens and citizens split, some to Mount Gerizim and half of it to Mount Eval, as Moses, the servant of God, commanded to bless the people of Israel at first. Right, and meaning back in Deuteronomy, we're told exactly how we're supposed to do that. And in fact, in Deuteronomy, we're told which 6 tribes were on Mount Eval, and the other half, which 6 tribes are on Mount Gerizim. Here it doesn't say, but it just says half and half. V'achareichen kara et kol divrei haTorah, habracha v'haklala, kechol hakatuv b'sefer haTorah. And after that, he read the entire Torah, the blessing and the curse, as it was written, as everything was written in the book of the Torah. Lo haya davar mikol asher tziva Moshe, asher lo kara Yehoshua neged kol kahal Yisrael, v'hanashim v'hataf v'hager haholech birkirbam. So he didn't leave out anything that Moses commanded, that Joshua read in front of the entire congregation of Israel, and the women, and the children, and the resident aliens going in that walked among them. So, defeated Ai, totally annihilated Ai, kept the cattle and the booty, and then built this altar, wrote the Torah down, and read it to the entire people of Israel. Okay, so now let's look at the commentary on this section, beginning with verse 18. So back on the bottom of 42, stretch out the javelin as a signal. Of course, the javelin by itself would not be seen by the ambush lying to the west of the city, but it was probably part of a prearranged sign which was visible. So I don't know if it wasn't visible or not, but the bottom of 43 now, power, literally hands. Ehrlich suggests that the meaning here is space. Yeah, they didn't have, Yadayim, they didn't have hands to run here or there. Yeah, so just weird image. So how to translate it? Okay, 44, verse 28, unto this day, from the standpoint of the writer, but it was subsequently rebuilt, as appears from Ezra 2, that is Ai, the city of Ai was rebuilt. So some, however, maintain that it continued in its ruined state for all time, the Ai mentioned in Ezra having been built on a different site. So I don't know. Why call a city Ai? It's an unusual name. It's not like Springfield, where every state has a Springfield. Ai is an unusual name, so why rebuild Ai unless you call it New Ai, right? Like New York, New London, right? It's just called Ai, so you would assume it's built on the same spot. Hanged after he was put to death. So that we don't know. They hung him on a tree, but the commentary suggests that he was killed first and then hung. Until the eventide, in accordance with the law of Deuteronomy 21:23, right? You're not supposed to let a carcass hang overnight. Man being made in the image of God, his dignity must be respected even in a condemned criminal. It's noteworthy that the law was carried out even with a non-Israelite. At the entrance of the gate of the city, the most conspicuous place where people congregated and public business was transacted, right? So everybody would see the king is lying here under the stones. A great heap of stones, see on chapter 7. Here it would serve as a memorial of the victory. The building of an altar, the inscription of the law of Moses upon stones, the proclamation of the blessing and curse as ordained in Deuteronomy 27:12. On to page 45, Mount Ebal, north of Shechem. An altar of unhewn stones, any iron. The purpose of the altar was to preserve life through atonement, whereas iron destroys it by the sword. It is not fitting, therefore, that the destroyer shall be lifted up over the preserver. Moreover, the altar promotes peace between Israel and his Father in heaven. Now, if the Torah stated, thou shalt lift up no iron tool upon them, concerning stones which neither see, nor hear, nor speak, because they promote peace between Israel and his Father in heaven, how much more so shall he who promotes peace between man and his neighbor, between husband and wife, between family and family, be spared tribulation.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you're going to be act peacefully to stones, how much more so should you act peacefully to human beings in your family? Burnt offerings, peace offerings. The former were entirely consumed on the altar. Of the latter, only the fat was burnt, the rest being eaten. The rabbis teach that the burnt offering made atonement for sins of omission. The peace offering, on the other hand, was an expression of gratitude to God. The stones, this can hardly mean the stones of the altar, but those prescribed in Deuteronomy 27, right? There's stones for the altar, and then there are other stones on which the Torah was written. A copy of the law of Moses, that is Deuteronomy, right? So it's interesting. The word here, Mishneh Torah, so it's translated the copy of the law of Moses. So that might imply the entire Torah. The commentary is suggesting sometimes the book of Deuteronomy itself is called Mishneh Torah, which is a repetition of the Torah or rewording of the Torah. So that is another name for the book of Deuteronomy, because many of the laws in Deuteronomy are a repeat of laws presented elsewhere in the Torah. So perhaps then, according to the commentary, only Deuteronomy was written. So the king was similarly enjoined to write such a copy and read it all his life. In both cases, the purpose was the same. King and commoner alike must know their duties and their rights, for both of which the law of Moses was the custodian and guarantor, which he wrote before the children of Israel, that all might know it. The idea of a privileged learned class is far into Judaism, which advocates a spiritual and intellectual democracy. How was the writing actually done? A careful examination of Deuteronomy 27 and Joshua 8 will lead to the opinion that the law was written upon or in the plaster with which these pillars were coated. This could easily be done, and such writing was common in ancient times. I have seen numerous specimens of it, certainly more than 2,000 years old, and still as distinct as when they were first inscribed in the plaster. So says Thompson. Okay. Yes, Barry.
The phrase "the copy of the law of Moses" above.
Yeah.
Don't I remember like a week or two ago we were reading something in Altar that said there's some speculation that the book of Joshua was written concurrently with the book of Deuteronomy.
Yeah, later
and
in
this-
time.
Hmm?
That was later in time. That is,
Mhm.
biblical scholars think
Right.
the author
And
of
so
Deuteronomy is the same as the author of Joshua.
So the fact that he might be reading the law of Deuteronomy, which was concurrent with
Right.
the book of Joshua, there's a little bit of sense there.
Yes, yes. But again, it's not clear from the text itself that it's only Deuteronomy. It says Mishneh Torah, Mishneh Torah Moshe, a copy of the Torah of Moses, which could still imply the entire Torah, not just the book of Deuteronomy. So it's interesting that even the commentaries are unclear how much of the Torah was written down at this point. Okay, we go on. Okay, there's not much comment to 33 here. On the bottom of 46, as well, the stranger as the homeborn. This lack of discrimination between the stranger and the homeborn is a practical example of the brotherhood of man as a corollary to the fatherhood of God. It agrees with the oft-repeated insistence in the Pentateuch that the rights and feelings of the stranger be fully respected. The rabbis observe that in no fewer than 36 places does the Torah command not to vex or oppress the stranger.
Unless they're a Hittite or a Jebusite or a Perizzite.
Right. Yeah. Mount Gerizim, see Deuteronomy 11:29, it faced Mount Ebal. At the first, in the Hebrew text, this phrase occurs at the end of the verse, and Ehrlich maintains that it's not to be connected with as Moses commanded, but with verse 32. Joshua first made the inscription upon the stones and afterwards read the words of the law. The people of Israel, there is the same peculiarity of grammatical instruction here as noted in verse 11. So what's unusual here? Et Ha'am Ha'am Yisrael, as opposed to Am Yisrael. That's that letter Hey. There's let's see, a couple places now you have an extra letter Hey, which makes it odd grammatically. Okay. Verse 35, and the women, Judaism has never held that women should be kept in ignorance. For the whole verse, see Deuteronomy 31. The little ones, education and knowledge of God must begin with the young. That walked among them, that is, accompanied the Israelites. Okay, so let's look at Alter now for this chapter. So we're on page 40. Only its booty and its cattle you may plunder. Ai, like Jericho, is to be put to the ban. Its structures burned and all its inhabitants massacred, but an exception is made for booty, which the conquering Israelites are allowed to take. The combat troops throughout this episode, elsewhere people, clearly has this military sense. 30,000 men, the very large number here for men in an ambush, is cited by proponents of the idea that Eleph must refer to a small contingent and does not mean 1,000. But highly exaggerated numbers are often used in ancient narrative, and the sense of contingent in the count of the deaths of the town's inhabitants in verse 30 is problematic. Behind the town, this would be west of the town. The main gates of the town are evidently on the eastern side, and the main Israelite camp is northeast of the city. Although God had said he would deliver Ai to Joshua, it is Joshua's shrewdness as a strategist that brings about the fall of the town. The elaboration of the details of military strategy is untypical of biblical narrative. Scholars have pointed out a similarity not only in strategy, but also in wording between this story and the account of the siege of Gibeah at the Civil War reported in Judges 20, and it is generally thought that this story draws on the one in Judges. Joshua shrewdly capitalizes on the previous defeat of the Israelites at Ai by seeming to repeat the same tactical error, positioning his troops in front of the town gate and then retreating. This time, however, he hides an attack unit behind the town that will move forward against it once the armed men of the town have been drawn out in pursuit of the main body of the Israelites. Okay, so it's just interesting that Alter is suggesting that maybe this strategy mentioned here is a copy of what was written down later in Judges with the town of Gibeah, because we don't have much military strategy being specified in the Bible. Before the troops, this phrase looks odd and may reflect a scribal error. And he took about 5,000 men. This verse seems to replicate verses 3 to 4, using a different, somewhat more plausible number, 5,000 instead of 30,000. It also puts the sending out of the ambush troops after the general encampment, not before it. Two different versions may have been awkwardly spliced together. And they put the troops, the whole camp. Like the translation, the wording of the Hebrew is a bit clumsy and the syntax ambiguous. It's covert contingent. The Hebrew akev usually means heel. There is no evidence that it means rear guard, as some claim, and an ambush is not a rear guard. It is equally questionable that it could mean far edge, again, an inappropriate term for ambush. The translation follows the Targum of Jonathan, Rashi, and Kimchi in relating akev to okba, a term that suggests deviousness and that might apply to an ambush. Okay. Joshua spent that night. I'm on page 42. The Masoretic text reads, Vayelech, walked, but a few manuscripts show Vayalen, spent the night, which seems more plausible. That was that comment that we saw before. The Arava, this is the north-south rift of the Jordan Valley, and is equivalent to the wilderness several times mentioned in this episode. Were routed. The obvious implication in context is pretended to be routed. The verb using vayinagu, literally were smitten, plagued, comes instead of the expected vayinagfu, and may be influenced by the parallel passage in Judges 20, where the same verbal stem is employed in a different sense. Reach out with the javelin that is in your hand. The exact nature of the weapon, kidon, is in dispute. Modern Hebrew has adopted it as a term for bayonet.
Mhm.
Some scholars think it's a kind of scimitar. In any case, the outstretched kidon is both a signal for the men in the ambush to move against the town and a magical act pointedly reminiscent of Moses' upraised staff in the battle against Amalek reported in Exodus 17. The ambushers, the Hebrew term ha'orev, can refer either to the ambush or as a collective noun to the combatants carrying out the ambush. And these had come out of the town toward them. These are the ambushers who, having put the town to the torch, now attack its troops outside, who are caught in a pincer movement between the main Israelite force and the ambushers, whether 5,000 or 30,000. The reference to no place to flee in verse 20 may be out of chronological order because it makes good sense here when the men of Ai are attacked from both sides. Turned back to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. The gruesome reality of this report is as follows. The ambushing force, after setting fire to the town and then coming out to join the attack on the troops of Ai, now comes back with the main Israelite camp to the town to slaughter the women and elders and children left there. Impaled on a pole, this is the form of execution that many modern scholars think likely, but the traditional rendering of hanged on a tree remains a distinct possibility. You know, the tala al ha'etz, it's how Haman was described as being executed in the book of Esther. So the tala al eitz, well, again, it's the problem of using modern Hebrew to translate biblical Hebrew. So tala means to hang or hung or hanged, right? But it's some translate as impaled. So that, you know, the javelin, you can use the javelin to impale. So, you know, I'm just saying that translating this as impaling, Alter is suggesting is the biblical way of understanding this. They took his corpse down from the pole and hung it by the entrance of the town gate. Oh, and flung it there. The use of the term of the verb flung is a clear indication that this is not an honorable burial, though the biblical prohibition against leaving a body hanging overnight is preserved. The place of burial may point toward the area in front of the gates of the town where the Israelites were killed in their earlier attack. Right, so to show, this is where we were defeated before, but we showed you, now your king is buried here. Then did Joshua build an altar. This textual unit invokes the two mountains of blessing and curse mentioned in Deuteronomy 11, and is a direct implementation of the command in Deuteronomy 27. On the day that you cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord your God is about to give you, you shall set up great stones and coat them with plaster. You shall write on them the words of this teaching, but the placement of the episode has puzzled both ancient and modern commentators. Temporally, it does not happen right after the crossing of the Jordan as it should. And geographically, the Israelites at Ai are not opposite Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. So the timing of it and also the placement of it is what Alter suggests is a problem here in the text. An altar of whole stones over which no iron has been brandished. This is an approximate quotation of Exodus 20. The repetition of the teaching of Moses, the Hebrew Mishneh Torah Moshe, refers to Deuteronomy, that Greek name itself being a rendering of the Hebrew Mishneh Torah. The Deuteronomist behind this story is clearly promoting the interests of his own privileged text. Right. Okay, it's 10:30. So we'll stop here for today. We'll meet again next Friday, but then the following Friday we will not, because that's Yontif. So 2 Fridays from today is the second day of Pesach, so no class then. So we'll see you next Friday, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.